Since the release of Into the Pit, a lot of people have been arguing about the date of the missing children's incident. A lot of people believe it's 1985, a lot of people believe it's in 1983. But in today's video, I'm going to try to put an end to at least part of the debate and answer the question, when was the missing children's incident? Obviously, remember that this is just my opinion, and I can't ridicule you for believing a theory, but I'm just here to tell you what I think. But before we start, consider subscribing and turning on notifications so you never miss an upload. I have a bunch more theories in the works, and I bet you guys won't want to miss those. But now, with that out of the way, let's get started. First off, I'm going to give my reasoning for believing the missing children's incident was not in 1985. Honestly, there's not much evidence for this really at all, and I know that most people who believe this only believe it because MatPat said so, and it's fine if you like MatPat's theories, but he's not Scott, and he can't confirm anything. Rather than blindly following what he says, it's better to look at the evidence yourself and come to your own conclusion. That's how I became Gold Duo. But anyway, the three pieces of evidence for this one are the Silver Eyes trilogy, Into the Pit, and Sergio's Lucky Day. In the Silver Eyes trilogy, the missing children's incident did take place in 1985. In Into the Pit, 6 children were killed in 1985. And in Sergio's Lucky Day, the year 1985 is mentioned once again, leading many people to believe the year does still have some merit to it. But all of these have big problems with them. The Silver Eyes trilogy is still questioned about whether we are able to use the evidence from them, but Scott did say that many elements of the lore are shared in the trilogy and the games, so we can probably use some things, but not too much. But anyway, the problem with the trilogy being used to prove MCI 85 is that the events of the first book take place in 1995, 10 years after the missing children's incident. But the events of that first book directly reference the events of the first FNaF game, so even if we were to apply this to the games, it would more so prove MCI 83 rather than 85, because it would, just like in the games, take place 10 years after the missing children incident. And since FNaF 1 is confirmed to be in 1993, 10 years before that would be 1983. Next, the events of Into the Pit seem to be mistaken for the events of the first missing children's incident, but it really doesn't seem to be actually representative of the first missing children's incident. If you really think about it, these events more so parallel the events of the Save Them murders from FNaF 2. Into the Pit shows that people are screaming and running away and out of Freddy's when the kids are murdered. This seems to imply that the dead bodies are visible to everyone and not actually missing, per se. This is a direct parallel to the Save Them minigames from FNaF 2, where we see that the dead bodies of the children are spread out around the location. It's also mentioned that Into the Pit that there are half a dozen kids, and half a dozen is 6 if you weren't aware. So there's 6 dead kids in Into the Pit. 6? The missing children's incident only saw the death of 5 children. Of course, there is Charlotte too, but she's not a missing kid. She's not missing at all. So that doesn't make sense. But if we go back to the Save Them minigame, we only see 5 dead bodies. But if you pay attention, there's a set of blood stains around the location as well, but not 5. Instead, there's 6 blood stains around the building. This implies that William killed 6 victims and saved them rather than 5. So what this all means is that Into the Pit does not prove the missing children's incident is in 1985. The murders in this story are really the murders of the Save Them massacre. But this also explains the reference to the date in Sergio's Lucky Day. You see, Save Them took place at the FNaF 2 location during 1987, a whole 2 years after Into the Pit takes place. And since all the Phasma Frights stories seem to be in the same universe, this means that the Phasma Frights universe events take place 2 years early, meaning Freddy's opened in 1981 instead of 1983. Because if you didn't know, Freddy's in the games opened in 1983. That was confirmed in FNaF VR using the Phas coins. Some people may say it opens later than that, and that's why MCI 85 is true, but no, it's confirmed that it had opened in 1983, and so that argument cannot be made. But anyway, Freddy's opened in 1981 in the Phasma Frights universe, and what we found takes place in 2021, this year. And whatever Sergio's Lucky Day is meant to represent may just take place in 1997, making the date for this location more and more likely to be 1997, but that's a theory for another day. So that's why all the evidence for the missing children's incident being in 1985 is complete trash. Don't get me wrong, it's okay if you believe it is, but I just don't see it being true because the evidence is just kind of bad. The next most popular theory on when the missing children's incident took place is 1983 and before the bite of 83, but I also disagree on this one. Though I still will go over the evidence for it and any flaws it may have. Most of the flaws for the theory are less for the theory and more for the evidence that people actually use for it. So this theory mostly comes from FNaF 4 minigames. Many people seem to believe that the bite victim saw the missing children's incident due to the line of, "Don't you remember what you saw? You know what will happen if he catches you." There's also Pigtail Girl's line where she says, "I hear they come to life at night, and when they die they hide your body and never tell anyone." And the final thing people use from this is the plushies. A lot of people believe that the plushies are possessed by the missing kids due to the line of, "We are still your friends." But all of these pieces of evidence can be explained in other ways. After MatPat made a theory about FNAF 4 and talked about how the bite victim saw something, he did a live stream with a bunch of people, as we all know. And Scott started updating his website with strange messages. These messages were made to try and steer us in the right direction, because it seemed like at the time we just weren't understanding the story. And I think the reason for that was actually explained in Scott's interview with Dawko. Listen to this clip from that interview.
He did a video on that box, and he kind of said that he thinks the contents of the box changed over the years. And I bet nobody gave that a whole lot of thought, but I saw that and I was like, he's absolutely right. He's absolutely right. The contents of that box have changed over the years because, it's for that very reason. It's because, of what I was intending the game to be when it happened. And then after the reaction of it, I was like, I need to craft this into something better for the people who see this as important. And that kind of indirectly does change the contents of the box, because it changes the contents of everything that came before.
Scott said that people were not satisfied with the lore of the story at the time of FNAF 4, so we literally had to change the lore afterwards. And what's the biggest, most controversial theory with a motherload of evidence from that time? Dream theory. A lot of people doubt Scott would have made Dream theory canon at any point, but evidence points to it being canon at one point. Then Scott changing it due to fans not liking the storyline, which was to be expected. As he said himself, would the community accept it that way? When the community doesn't accept it, that's when Scott changes the lore. And if you don't believe me, ask yourself this: what else could have been so bad that he had to change the lore? So anyways, that pretty much explains the Tiny Toy Chica detail. But we also got 4 games, 1 story, which doesn't explain much, and most importantly, what is seen in shadows is easily misunderstood in the mind of a child. This pretty explicitly tells us that whatever the bite victim saw was a misunderstanding, not the missing children's incident. I mean, it's pretty simply told to us. There's really nothing else that I can use to explain this. It's just told to us that the bite victim only saw what he misunderstood. But even without this, I find it unlikely that the bite victim saw the missing children's incident. After all, he's warned not to go over to the stage, and when we go over to the stage, we see the purple shadows of the animatronics. Typically in the minigames, shadows are only represented as purple due to the background being dark, so Scott needs a way to make the shadows visible. This was confirmed by Scott himself when he said MatPat was correct in his timeline video on his explanation for why William was shown purple in the minigames. So there's no reason these shadows of the animatronics on the stage should be purple unless to establish a connection between the shadow animatronics and what the bite victim saw. Considering, like I said, the bite victim is warned about what he saw when he steps toward the stage, and when he finally does, there are the shadows. And Midnight Motorist also supports this idea of what the bite victim saw being a shadow animatronic. FNAF 6 was a game made to fill in holes that we don't exactly have answers to, or have wrong answers to, like who the puppet is. Midnight Motorist is one of the most confusing minigames to a lot of people, but if you really think about it, it doesn't really tell us a whole lot. It does tell us some stuff, yeah, but not as much as we make it out to, unless you really think about this. The kid who ran away is very clearly the bite victim, and there's an animatronic outside his window, the window where he ran away. And since he's alive here, obviously this is before the bite of 83. And that makes it very likely that this animatronic outside his window is what the bite victim saw, because otherwise, why are we being shown this? You may be wondering what the bite victim saw, and I made a whole video on that, and I think the animatronic outside the window, like I said, is likely a shadow animatronic, due to the fact that there's no footprints leading up to the house. It's as if the animatronic appeared out of thin air, which is fitting for a shadow animatronic. So since Midnight Motorist is obviously before FNAF 4, and since it's right after Charlotte's death, that means Charlotte died before the bite victim. And since Charlotte possesses the puppet would be moving around on its own. It also does stuff things inside stuff Yeah. I don't think the puppet actually stuffs the kids into the animatronics, but Phone Guide in FNAF 2 does say that the animatronics may stuff you into a suit. And, well, the puppet is one of the animatronics, I guess. So when Pigtail Girl was talking about how the animatronics come to life at night and hide your body, it could have been referring to the puppet. It doesn't have to be referring to the animatronics. It could also just be a reference, and it could just be explained by the possibility that Dream Theory used to be true. But yeah. And finally, the plushies. Honestly, I never believed they were possessed by the missing kids, even when I used to believe the missing children's incident was before the FNAF 4 minigames. And now I think they're there to just represent the animatronics. After all, in Gumdrop Angel, there's a short scene in the story where Ophelia was talking to her toys, just like the bite victim does. And I don't think her toys are possessed, because, well, yeah, nothing implies that. Also, another thing I find weird is that in the logbook, the faded text says to the alter text, "Do you miss them?" which is obviously directed towards the bite victim, and a lot of people consider this to be confirmation that the bite victim was friends with the missing kids. But this doesn't make sense, because the bite victim, at least in my opinion, very clearly possesses Golden Freddy. What does the faded text mean by "do you miss them" if he's still trapped in a restaurant with all his friends? So in other words, I don't think it makes sense that the "do you miss them" line from the logbook was referring to the missing kids. Don't get me wrong, it still seems kind of likely that the bite victim was friends with the missing kids, or at least knew them, but I don't think the logbook is what proves that. But that's not really relevant, I just wanted to bring it up. So now that we've gone over the popular MCI time frame theories, let's move on to the least popular, aka the one I believe. That the missing children's incident was in 1983, but after the bite of 83. There's 3 big pieces of evidence for this one, and 1 minor piece of evidence that relies on another theory. That minor piece of evidence is that the missing kids could actually be the kids we see in the FNAF 4 minigames. Well, including Pigtail Girl, because, well, that just doesn't fit anybody. And I think this mostly just goes for Toy Girl and Susie. I mean, just look at the design. Sure, the hair color is a little bit different, but it's still basically blonde, just a slightly darker blonde. And Scott's never really been that good with sprites, let's be honest. That's what sparked the whole pink guy debate. Because there's like 5 different purple guy sprites, maybe more. And this girl's hair is barely off. It's just a little darker than it should be. And same with her eyes, but they're still blue. After all, Mike and Sis Location's 8-bit cutscenes has a similar eye color. But in FNAF 1, they look much lighter. So we could say the same about this toy girl. But her hair and eye color are not the only thing connecting this girl to Susie. No. They also both have a red bow in their hair, and I find that interesting because looking at Susie in FNAF 6, it's actually difficult to see her bow. You kind of have to brighten it up a bit to see it clearly. And in typical Scott fashion, that's usually how he shows stuff in his teasers. It's almost as if this bow in her hair was something he wanted to hide, but that could be a stretch. The important thing is that they both have a red bow in their hair. Also, their shirts are a similar color. Obviously, it's a different shirt, but the color is roughly the same. Susie's maybe a little bit more purple than pink, but it's still similar, and I thought it was worth mentioning. But there's one more thing that connects these 2 characters together. The girl in FNAF 4 is often referred to as the toy girl. I mean, in this video, I've already referred to as that. But the reason for that is literally because she loves her toys. And fast forward to Coming Home, where the main character is a girl named Susie with a huge connection to Chica, who always loves playing with her toys. But anyway, that's just one piece of evidence. And Wolfie1740 Kingdom, the guy who created the Evan victim theory, made a whole Reddit post about this. And all the other FNAF 4 kids being the missing kids. And it also provides an explanation for the theory Mike Fritz and why Mike uses that name in FNAF 2. I'll leave a link to that Reddit post in the description down below so you can check it out for yourself. But even if that doesn't convince you, I have more. The next one is a better piece of evidence, and may be able to convince more of you, maybe, but it all has to do with Fazbear Frights. It's kind of just a recurring thing. Basically, it goes through one specific month that goes along well with the parallels. And I know what you're thinking, some parallels are bad, it's just a month that goes along with a bad parallel, and I understand why people would think that, but let me just explain first. The first appearance of this month was in Gumdrop Angel. This quote from the story was stated on Ophelia's birthday, although the whole story does take place on Ophelia's birthday, but whatever. Quote, "She couldn't believe how close it was to June and graduation." June. June is the month of the missing children's incident as seen in FNAF 1, but this is before June. This is before the missing children's incident. Ophelia's birthday is before the missing children's incident. And as said earlier, Ophelia seems like a parallel to the bite victim and how her older sibling hates her for getting all the attention, how it's her birthday and how a lot of people are there, and how she talks to her toys. So that places the bite victim's birthday before the missing children's incident. And again, you might not be convinced because it is just a parallel, but what's weird is this happens again. Let's fast forward to Friendly Face. In this story, Edward witnesses the death of his best friend Jack. Now, Edward has a couple similarities with Mike. After Jack dies, Edward has this phase where he kind of blames himself and he feels guilty about Jack's death. And he also kind of just doesn't know who to blame, which very much seems like Mike. As he says in the logbook, he tripped and fell on Freddy's teeth, not our fault. This could be a sign that he doesn't really know at this point whether it's his fault or Fredbear's fault. Also, during his grief phase after Jack and Faraday die, Edward doesn't take a shower for a few weeks and smells terrible. This goes back to Mike in FNaF 1 and 2, where he has odor. So Edward is a Mike parallel, but this in turn makes Jack a bite victim parallel, considering, well, death. And also the fact that Jack possesses the Faraday animatronic, a version of the thing that killed him, just like it seems the bite victim possesses Golden Freddy, a version of Fredbear. Obviously in a different way, but the point still stands. But the interesting thing is that Jack dies a few weeks before school ends. And what month does that sound like to you? May. Just like Ophelia's birthday. I just find it really weird that not one but two different events that are similar to the Bite of 83 or have something to do with the Bite of 83 both happen in May and not October like some people seem to believe. So yeah, the Bite of 83 was not during October, but honestly just looking at how FNaF 4 works debunks that anyway. Like, why are there no leaves on the ground? And more importantly, why would the DLC make it so the game becomes Halloween if it already is Halloween? Doesn't make sense. And the answer is simple, because it's not Halloween. So it seems like the Bite of 83 happened in May of 1983, and that would place the bite before the missing children's incident. But again, this isn't as good evidence as other evidence. So yeah, let's move on. Next up, let's rewind back to Midnight Motorist. I think it's pretty widely accepted that the reason the bite victim was locked in his room during FNaF 4 is due to him running away like he does in Midnight Motorist. But what a lot of people don't think about is the fact that Midnight Motorist itself could be why the bite victim was locked in his room. Like I said, Midnight Motorist is right after Charlotte's death. Is it possible that it's also right before the FNaF 4 minigames? You could say this is just trying to establish that the bite victim does run away, but why would we need to see this specific time unless it's important? You might say to show what he saw, but why does that have to happen the same night Charlie died? It doesn't seem like the bite victim saw Charlie's death. After all, that has nothing to do with Fredbear or Spring Bonnie, so there's no reason for that to be the case. What's most likely happening here is that Midnight Motorist is right before the FNaF 4 minigames, meaning Charlotte died right before the FNaF 4 minigames. And with that being the case, there's no more time for the missing children's incident to take place if it's before FNaF 4, since Henry confirms in FNaF 6 Charlotte was William's first victim. So if Midnight Motorist is right before the FNaF 4 minigames, as it seems to be, the missing children's incident must take place after the Bite of 83. And now, the final and most damning piece of evidence, the Springlock failure. A few months ago, I got a comment. I don't know what the comment was on or who sent the comment, sorry about that, but the comment basically just said that the Springlock failure mentioned in FNaF 3 could possibly be the Bite of 83, and more importantly, could have been a cover-up. When I got that comment, I thought to myself, that makes a lot of sense, and so I told Krakoa about it, and he now believes it. Since then, he's made an entire doc on it, which I'll link in the description. But I'm just going to go through the important parts. A lot of people think the bite can't be a Springlock failure because the suit was in animatronic mode, but like I said, it's possible that calling it a Springlock failure could have been a cover-up. The New Kid and Pizza Kid may also support it being a cover-up, since Pizza Kid shows a girl who thinks she's lost her friend and has guilt nightmares about it, one of which even seeming to be very similar with Mike's run-in with Ennard, very much implying that Peyton represents Mike Afton, and the New Kid has some very strong parallels with the Bite of 83, which at this point I don't think I even have to explain. In both these stories, the Mike parallels desperately try to hide what happened to the Bite victim parallel, trying to cover it up, and this could imply that the Bite of 83 was also covered up. There's also the fact that Springlock suits are made up of multiple spring locks. They don't have to be all on or off at the same time. Some can be on while some can be off at the same time. We see this in Dislocation Night 4. So it's very possible that when putting the bite victim inside Fredbear's mouth, or even before the party, Michael opened up the spring locks on Fredbear's mouth to be sure the bite victim could fit inside there. Looking at Fredbear's jaw normally, there's absolutely no way a child could fit inside there, implying something was done to his jaw to be sure that it can. Jump for Tickets also supports the idea that Fredbear could have possibly been rigged. Not to kill the bite victim, obviously, Mike isn't heartless, but just to scare him, just like the bite victim planned to do with Kelsey. Maybe the actual full-on pressure of a most likely 9-year-old child inside the mouth was too much pressure for the jaw locks alone to handle, causing it to break loose and chomp down onto the bite victim. This could be the case no matter whether the bite victim was covered up or not. Hell, it's even possible that Phone Guy in FNaF 3 saying spring-lock failure was actually referring to a failure with the spring-lock suits rather than the actual spring locks. Recently, the Fazar Fright story called Together Forever came out. The main premise of the story is two bratty girls reprogramming a spring-lock suit to force annoying kids to serve them. Yep, for real. As weird as it sounds, it's actually a pretty good story. But not only was the story good, it actually explained quite a bit. It confirmed for us that multi-possession is possible without any external means or combination of possessed objects, and it also talks about spring-lock suits and tells us the real reason spring-lock suits were decommissioned. It was due to a programming error where the suits would automatically switch modes. And this seems to further explain that the bite of 83 could be the spring-lock failure. Maybe Fazbear Entertainment theorized that the bite was caused by this programming error where the suit switched modes, killing the bite victim. Not only that, but going back to the new kid, Devin goes back to the restaurant to try and see if Kelsey was alive. The pressure of Devin's arm in Golden Freddy's mouth caused another spring-lock failure, even though the suit was already in animatronic mode. This also lines up with the bite of 83. Also, Kelsey's death is so clearly a representation of the bite, and I don't find it to be a coincidence that an event that parallels the bite is shown as a spring-lock failure. And another thing that is actually a really damning piece of evidence is, if the bite of 83 wasn't the spring-lock failure and the failure actually happened earlier than FNaF 4, then why are Fredbear and Spring Bonnie still being used at Fredbear's? At that point, if the spring-lock failure was before the bite, Fredbear should have already been closed, and Fredbear and Spring Bonnie would already be retired. Now, I haven't actually explained yet how this all proves that the missing children's incident was after FNaF 4, minigames that is, so I'll tell you now. It's because Phone Guy flat out confirms for us that the missing children's incident happened after the spring-lock failure, since he says that Spring Bonnie has been moved after the suits have been retired. And it's not like the calls are out of order, since as Phone Guy says in this call, Spring Bonnie is dangerous. And since the spring-lock failure, aka the bite of 83, obviously in 1983 happens only shortly before the missing children's incident, that also prevents the missing children's incident from being in 1985. So now that's everything. If you disagree with me, that's completely fine, just don't be rude about it in the comments. Instead, feel free to let me know what you believe. If I haven't convinced you, again, that's fine. I've simply just laid out all the evidence so that you can make an informed decision all by yourself. So, now I hope you all enjoyed this video. If you did, then please do leave a like and subscribe. Stay tuned for my next 2 theories videos on all the victims in the series and Syslocation's time placement. But for now, I'll see you all in the next video. Bye, guys. So, if Midnight Motorist is right before the FNaF 4 minigames, as it seems to be, the missing children's incident must take place after the missing children's incident.